right. Welcome back to the Board Drill Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kyle, and with me is my host, Matt Dixon. Tonight, we have a special guest, Greg Nelson, who is the OC at Concordia University in Nebraska. And also, he is a senior VP for Hudl. So, Greg, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you on.
Yeah, thank you. I think Matt and I share the distinction then of having both been your boss at some point, potentially.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Two people have been my boss and probably thought about firing me multiple times, but had a lot of pity for me. So just kind of kept me around long enough for me to just screw it up for myself. So yeah, you guys are both guys who have been good to me, and I've probably been not very good to you. So thanks for coming on the show though, Greg. We're excited to have you here.
Pumped to be here.
So tonight, it's a really interesting story, Greg, and I wanted you on here because obviously, look, you're coaching ball at the college level. You're an OC now. That's fantastic. You were also a head coach in the high school world not too long ago. But the big thing that was really cool about that is you've worked at Hudl this entire time, pretty much through the process, really, except for your first couple of years of coaching, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I've been at Hudl for, it'll be 15 years in January, and this will be my 16th season of coaching. So I coached for 1 year right before I started at Hudl, and then I bounced around to a couple of different schools in Lincoln as an assistant coach before being the head coach at Lincoln Lutheran High School for about 9 years.
Yeah, and that's pretty wild. What's the 15-year gift at Hudl? They still going out gifts for amount of years that you're there?
They do. At 15, you get a sabbatical. So I get 3 or 4 weeks off and some cash to go on vacation. So I'm planning to take all that time.
Yeah, it's I can talk about. I also worked at Hudl too for a couple of years before they were like, get out of here. It's such a cool thing. They do these things, like 1 year and 5 years. I don't know what it is anymore, Greg. I know it used to be like 5 years was one of the trips as well.
Yeah,
I still have a
5 years.
backpack.
There used to be like it'll be a long time if somebody works here for 5 years. So we're gonna give them a reward trip, and then they're like, oh, we'll have to do this at 10 and 15. So I'm just gonna see how long they keep this going for me.
Yeah, and it's wild to see how much the company has grown. And it's been a while now. I guess it's been 10, 15 years since I've been there, but it's been wild to see how much it's grown. It's a really cool thing and a big part of the football world. You guys do a clinic series now and all these, awesome things for coaches. So I know I always appreciate it. I get that some people out there kind of want to moan on Twitter about Hudl sometimes and this and that, but there's a lot worse things out there, as we've discussed before, than using some Hudl. So let's get into it, Coach. All right. So your first couple years, you were at the high school level. You were working really off campus, and you have been the whole time. How was that going through that? And then talk about your transition from an assistant to a head coach and how it was being a head coach while you were still off campus. And how did you manage that? Because that's probably pretty tough.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges that come with being off campus. I think that's the number one thing I got asked about in every single interview that I was a part of too. I think it was good that I got to learn as an assistant. So I was the head sophomore coach at Lincoln East for a few years before I made the jump to head coach. So I kind of got the experience of running a small group on my own, having to schedule practices, having to be around at odd times. And it really taught me that you just got to be able to manage your time really well, but also you got to really overemphasize building relationships. Like, there is a little bit of out of sight, out of mind when you're off campus. The kids just don't see you as much. The parents just don't see you as much, and they're not going to recognize you if you walk by them in the grocery store or something like that. And so you got to just overemphasize some of the building relationships. I did that a lot through just attending other sporting events. It's like go to a baseball game, go to a track meet, go to a basketball game. The head coach at Lincoln East, John Gingery, he was always famous for doing the PA announcing at basketball games. He's a big old voice and did a great job of that. And so I kind of took a page from him when I made the jump to be a head coach. I took over our kind of broadcasting, announcing for basketball games and things like that. So it gave me an opportunity to stay close with the guys who play multiple sports, but also kind of build a relationship with other people who are, on campus or listening in. And so that was fun. I made the jump to being a head coach, and I got lucky. It was kind of a small private school in Lincoln, about 40 kids on the team on any given year. And we started, I think they'd had one winning season in the 10 years before that. And the first 2 years we were there, we went 1-17. So there was a lot of questioning of like, am I doing this right? What is going on? And there's so much of it that's just like keep putting one foot in front of the other. And then the next 3 years, we were 7-2 each year. We made the state semifinals 2 years after the 1-17. And so we got the thing turned in the right direction, and we were able to start kind of building the program. But it took everything of me and probably all my wife's patience and everything like that too. And so especially when you're off campus, you just got to like really invest in spending time in the building and doing all those little extra things that you don't even think about. Whether it's I stay after lifting we lift in the mornings, stay after lifting for a little bit and watch the kids come in. You figure out who's late to class, who's early to class. You get catch them in the hallways. You can kind of head off some problems like that, or getting there early on a Friday before a game. I would try to get there around lunchtime, and so I could sit and have lunch with the kids or catch them, in one of their free periods or things like that. That was always just a good chance for me to build relationships on time that I knew was kind of theirs, and I was just borrowing it. But yeah, you got to have a supportive family that lets you kind of take that extra time, and I'm blessed with Megan. She lets me invest a lot of time in this stuff. So the other thing I will say about being an off-campus coach is especially a head coach, you got to be really strategic with the staff that you build. We had a number of off-campus coaches as a part of our staff at Lincoln Lutheran, a few people that worked at Hudl as well. But I always tried to pick one or two coaches that were either in the building as a teacher or were maybe a parent in that group or had good relationships with people in the community so that I could kind of keep my ear to the ground and they would kind of keep their ear to the ground and let me know what they were hearing or issues that were popping up. And the gentleman who was my kind of my co-OC and my offensive and defensive line coach for the whole 9 years we were there, he had a son who was a freshman the very first year, and he ended up staying all 9 years. He also ended up becoming the president of the school board. So that was really helpful to have like good connections all the way up on that side. And talk about being able to bridge the gap and making sure we're all speaking the same language is like just really helped from an alignment perspective. So I got really lucky having a good staff that was still connected and that as well.
Coach, you may be the only person I've ever known that had the president of a school board also on his staff. That has to be the most bulletproof thing ever, right, Matt? I mean, that would, it's like, hey, we're good, right? That. Hey, Mr. Johnson, right? We're good here.
So we got lucky because it's a really supportive community. And so the fact that he had 3 kids in the school and, just we were able to connect all of that. And it was really helpful. So.
Yeah, I love how you talk about the days that you did hang around school, that it was almost like kids were almost shocked to see in the hallway and stuff like, oh crap, there's coach. Like, I better get to class. I better be on time. So that's that's an interesting piece of being an off-campus coach, is that when you're around, they're not always ready for it. So you could pop up at any minute.
We get the same emails I'm sure everybody does where, the math teacher, the science teacher is like, your kid's misbehaving. I was like, I don't even work there, man. Like, yeah, I know he plays football, but he also plays 2 other sports. But I'll take care of it where I can. And so you just kind of like, that's how you build the relationship. You just kind of like lean in and help calm the waters.
Oh, it's always your kid, right? You only hear from those teachers when it's negative. You never get that positive email of like, oh, Johnny's been great in class, right? It's always, he did this and he did that and this and that, blah, blah, blah. So,
Coach, I could only imagine the communication issues that arise for not being on campus, right? That has to be the hardest part. I was a head coach at 2 different schools and always found the key to the program was communication with parents, teachers, players. Is there anything you can kind of give coaches from your experience there, being off campus, what you did to improve communication?
Yeah, overshare as much as possible. It's not just like one email a week is never going to be enough. Like you're never going to be able to have the right kind of impact. So I actually talked to a few different coaches who just what do they do for communication, and one of the coaches that I thought did a great job, he actually coached at our rival school and does an awesome job. He said he sends out kind of a mini game plan to parents every week. That's just like, if you were a fan in the stand just watching this game from a third-party perspective, these are the kids you should keep an eye on. This is kind of the offense that they run. He was, we'll win if these 3 things happen, or, kind of trying to educate them and bring them along in that process. And I thought, I always tried to include maybe, here's the highlight clips of last year's game when we played them or things like that to show, we're trusting you with a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of information, but also like we want you on this journey with us. We want you bought in on our success. And so anything you can do like that about, why are we doing camp in the summer, or why do we need to have pads checked out at this time, or how do we think about kind of seniority, over communicate literally all of those things, put them in emails, do Zoom meetings, do one-on-ones. You just literally can't do enough of it. I got lucky because at a small school, it's a little bit easier. You just have a smaller blast radius for any issues that come up. You can kind of deal with it that way. But you'd be shocked at the number of times I had a one-on-one meeting with a parent. They're like, "Do not tell my kid we're meeting." It's just like, he's gonna find out your car is right here. Like, it's not that big of a school. So it was just more of a. Anytime we could kind of get everybody on the same page, everybody in the same room, we'd really do that. So we had some group of parents that were really successful and helpful, and like spun up some booster club style things and did tailgating at our scrimmages and stuff like that. It was just good to have everybody around. Normally as a coach, you might be a little uncomfortable with having every parent at kind of your first summer scrimmage, but it was always a great opportunity to like reintroduce yourself to everybody, have the seniors kind of talk to the freshman parents and guide them along the way. And so those are just a few of the things that we did, but you literally cannot do it enough. I don't know how to say it any different than that.
No, I love the idea of doing the game plan thing, and to an extent, I probably would have taken it a little bit further because I'm me. I would have been like, look, we're faking the first punt, and then not faked it just to see who was really looking for it, right? Just to put it out there in the ethos spec. All right, who's telling people about what we're doing around here? So sometimes you got to test the parents, right?
You're real Mike Leach. Leave the play call sheet on the sideline with your parents.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a pirate. What can I say? So, all right, you started this journey. We talk about this. How did you convince your bosses at Hudl to let you roll out every day and go to practice and do all this stuff? How did that work? Because I'm very curious about that. Maybe I can take a page out of your playbook.
You're good. I will say they were bought in from the get-go. I think that's one of the unique things about Hudl is we've always tried to keep kind of user feedback and this kind of user story first and foremost. And being a coach, there's no better way to get an understanding of how our customers use the product than being a coach yourself. And so they did put a little bit more on me. That's, hey, if you're going to do this, it's got to be valuable for everybody. Meaning you got to do some write-ups on what you're doing, what tools are you using, talk us through your workflows. Teach football to us, like teach football to people who don't know about it and they want to understand it a little bit more so they can kind of understand the people that they're talking to on the phone every day. And so I'd say most of the people at Hudl are really sports focused. You don't have to be if you don't want to be. And so they're open to education and other things like that. The second one is just like, you're never going to be able to do that stuff if you're also not good at your job. And so I was always able to keep the main thing. And it's just like, there were some days that I got to practice late because I had, a Hudl meeting or a call that went long, and you got to have a supportive assistant staff that can maybe cover for you a little bit. I got lucky. Our defensive coordinator also worked at Hudl, and there wasn't a period of 9 years where we both had the same meeting at the same time in the same afternoon. And so we kind of got lucky on that front where, as our defensive coordinator, we could spend our whole meeting time on defense instead of offense, or vice versa. If I wasn't there, he couldn't be there. And so we played off each other pretty well on that side. But you don't just get to still show up at 8 or 9 and then leave at 3 for practice.
Correct,
it means you're there at 6:30. It means you're there at 7. It means when you get out of practice, you're gonna answer emails or Slacks for the rest of the day. It means if you get a phone call during practice, you might just need to step out a little bit, because at the end of the day, I love coaching more like a lot, but I like to joke. We're paying side hustle. Yeah. Coaching does not pay the bills in the same way. I wish it did, but it doesn't. And so that's also an expectation you got to set with your bosses and people who are in charge from a school perspective. I got lucky because we had a great staff that always kind of covered for us. But if I needed to stay after to talk to a parent, it meant it was going to be a little bit delayed getting home or a little bit delayed getting a response to some stuff at work. And so I always try to kind of prioritize in that way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you talked about the interview process with this as well. So talk about when you were interviewed, I assume by the principal and the AD. You've kind of touched on some of these points, but what were the points that you really had to hammer home to convince them that you were, to be okay with an off-campus head coach, that you were a guy that could come in and do this?
Yeah, the biggest one was just showing them, here's my 12-month plan for how we're going to do this. Obviously, I'm going to show up to practices and we're going to do that. Here's the commitment I'm making to be here in the winters when we're doing weightlifting, in the spring when these things are going on, in the summer, here's the camps, here's the setup we want to run. They didn't really have a strength and conditioning program when we first started, and so a lot of that was on us as coaches to lead. And it meant being there 4 days a week at 6 in the morning to kind of lead them through that stuff. And just showing them that commitment, I think spoke a lot to them and letting them know that, hey, we're going to plan on being here. They've eventually hired a strength coach to be a part of that, and they kind of took some load off of us, but it would have not got off the ground if we weren't kind of showing them the real need for being able to do that. Thankfully, one of the strength coaches was also one of our former players, and so he was kind of got brought up through things, and then he was able to kind of start running it himself. So that was good. But I tell people this all the time when I speak for some head coaching interviews. They'll come to me and they'll say, "Do you think they'll be okay with this kind of scheme or that kind of scheme?" And I was like, "The AD and the principal, they will not care what scheme you're in." Like, there might be some that happen that you're there, but like, they're going to care so much more about how you deal with parents, how do you deal with kids who are in trouble with grades, how do you help in the weight room, like what is the literal 9-month plan outside of season that you're doing to help build this program. And it's just so much. As an X's and O's guy, I have a tendency to get caught up in the X's and O's, but it's just so much more about it. I think you all understand. You've been head coaches too, but it's just leaning into how you're going to be a part of the community even more. And so that was also a little uphill climb. Is I'm not Lutheran. I wasn't a part of the Lutheran church community. And so, it was just showing them that I can still embrace their values, and here's how I've done it in different ways. And kind of relating my upbringing to the pieces that they value too. And so they definitely took a bet on me. But I don't think I would have gotten the opportunity if I didn't show them how organized and how well planned we had this thing already.
Did working at Hudl help at all?
It helped from a technology perspective. I think everybody wants to take advantage of the technology that's there. We probably got some discounts along the way too, since I also was the GM there. So being able to just kind of finagle that probably helped the budget situation a little bit too. But that definitely wasn't why, but it was more of a, hey, this is somebody who we think is going to help elevate the performance of our athletes, but also educate the kids, like educate them on what good looks like and going to be taught in the right way. I think during my interview, I started airplaying some video and a practice script on the TV that was in there. And they're kind of blown away by some of that stuff. They're just like, okay, this guy gets how to teach, like from a multimedia perspective. He can pull them together on a chalkboard or on an airport, like whatever it is.
You Tony Starked them is what you did.
Yeah.
You just right.
Yeah, I was just pumped they had airplay on the TV, and I got kind of lucky that I didn't have to just kind of turn the computer around and show them. So, but just like I said, having all those details planned at the time was really helpful.
Yeah, no, and that makes so much sense from it, and it's just. Like I said, I'm always so curious about it. It's such a unique situation. We just don't see it very much. I mean, Matt, do you know any off-campus head coaches that you've known kind of in your tenure here in Florida?
They're few and far between, but typically they're at a school that honestly can't find somebody to come on campus and get a teaching job. So they're mostly guys that are kind of, taking a job that no one really wants, to be honest. You see it in some of the small or some big schools that just can't compete in the state of Florida. But any big school or at least strong program isn't going to go that direction just because there's so many options for coaches in Florida.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to, hey, Greg, your background and how good of an interview you were. And I really can't speak enough about this. That's a tough thing to sell, right? Like, hey, I'm going to be off campus and I'm going to do all that. So like your plan, just like you said, has to be tremendous and all that. It's an impressive thing. I don't know if I could do it right now. I don't know if I could roll down, and I don't know if dropping the Board Drill podcast would be quite like dropping. I work for Hudl, so they're probably two different things. But I will ask you after we hop off the podcast. I'm going to have you call my CEO. Just hey, let Kyle coach. So. All right, we've been through, it's impressive. 9 years, right? Built it up, struggled early on. You got through 1-17, which would have broke me as a human being. I'm going to be honest with you. So good for you. Because 1-9 broke me. I'll just be honest with you. How did you make this transition to college? Like, how does it even come up? How does it come about? And then you got into college, and now you're calling plays. So, huge transition. And then somehow you were able to gain the trust pretty quickly and move into calling plays and everything. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I decided after 9 years that I wanted to stop being the head coach. I was getting a little burnout towards the end. I think you kind of view this when you bring a freshman class in. It's kind of like we coached 2 full generations of kind of Lincoln Lutheran players in 9 years, where you get to see somebody like the students that we saw in 5th grade when we went into elementary schools graduated that last year I was there. And so it was one of those things where it's like, I'm kind of ready to let somebody else take the reins. I'm getting a little burnout, which hurts me on the relationship building side, because then I don't want to invest as much into it. And had a kid that summer too. And so having a 2-month-old at home was kind of what tipped me over the edge of like, okay, this is actually really hard. I was doing a full-time job, 2-month-old at home. And so I stepped back from being a head coach, and it was definitely sad for me, but it was also like, okay, I'll take a step back and just see what's out there. I didn't know what I was going to do or where I was going to go. And I remember Megan, my wife, after the first 4 weeks, she's like, honestly, you've watched more film in the last 4 weeks than you were doing during season. Like, are you not done coaching? Like, what is the deal? And I was just like, I'm absorbing things. I'm just learning what's out there and taking a chance. And so I had a couple conversations with both a couple high schools in Lincoln and then a couple colleges in kind of the Lincoln area. And I had previous relationships with all of them. I'd coached at one of the schools before. I worked with one of the head coaches before. We'd sent kids to both of the colleges before. And so they kind of knew me and knew my philosophy and what I was about a little bit. And so a lot of it was just starting to have conversations with them and be open to whatever opportunities that they had. And sometimes it was an opportunity that I was really excited about, like coaching quarterbacks, or sometimes it was one that I was like, I don't really want to go back to coaching freshmen or sophomores. I kind of been there, done that. But and so just trying to find where you can fit. And so a lot of the conversations that I had were like sharing my thoughts and opinions, but also like trying to see how open those staffs were to feedback and thoughts. Not that we need to run the Greg Nelson offense when we come in, but more of a like, hey, can I riff with you? Can we debate a little bit back and forth? Can we find some answers to things that we want to do? And so that's what really I tried to find, is like, where can I go where I'm valued a little bit, or where, there's some mutual respect there. And so if in those meetings they're not asking questions about how we did stuff or what we thought, it's like, then they don't care. Or if they don't, the biggest moment for me was when I was talking with Coach Daberco, who is the head coach at Concordia, and we were sitting with him and the offensive line coach, Grady Cook, and I was like, this is some of the stuff we did against the number one team in the state. We lost, but this is kind of like the best that we're going to see. And they're like, it's the same. Like, football's the same. I get that you have different kids. I get that there's like a little bit different level of competition, but like, it's the same. We get it. The scheme is good no matter, kind of what level. And I was just like, whoa, okay, they have some respect. They also understand that like ideas can translate between levels. And though while we weren't speaking the same language at that point in time, it was like, I can work with these guys. I can riff with them, and we can come up with the Concordia Bulldogs offense. Like, we can create that together, and it's not going to be a fight one way or the other. It doesn't mean we don't have disagreements, but it was like that test was good for me to understand, okay, who's open, who's not, and how can I kind of find the right spot for me. And so Concordia actually is the furthest away from my house from any of the people that I talked with. So Megan was like, are you sure you don't want to find one that's a little bit closer? But she, when I came home from a couple of the conversations with them, she was like, you sound different about it. You seem more bought in, more excited. Like, it's something I think we should do. And so she supported me in doing that. And then I got thrown right in the fire on spring ball. I think I had a conversation with them maybe 2 or 3 weeks before spring ball started. And I was just like, we never had spring ball at this school. I don't know any of these kids. I don't know any of the scheme. And so it was just kind of like ramping up as fast as I could and trying to figure out where I could provide value. And so when I think about, I think some of this advice is good for anybody who's joining a new staff. Is not just like go into college, but I think if you're joining a new staff, like, some of my advice would be, you just have to be curious. Like, I see so many people join new staffs, and then they'll call me and say, I can't believe they do this. This is wild. Why do they do this? And it's like, hey, maybe we don't assume they're idiots. Don't start with like, they're putting in a lot of time and effort. Just don't assume they're idiots. Maybe ask why. And so being able to just focus on asking why a lot and being curious helped me uncover, okay, this is what they value about this concept, or this is what they thought they were getting in this set, that, okay, now I can help kind of build that. And then once you start speaking the same language, the way they call formations, the way they call plays is just totally different for me. And so the faster that I could learn the language, it meant the faster I could participate in those conversations and those debates. It also helped me like uncover some tendencies or uncover some challenges that they were facing from an offensive perspective, but using their terminology helped them absorb it and understand it and say, oh, okay, yeah, we're on the same team now. I get the feedback that you're giving me. It's not like you're asking them to bend over backwards trying to learn your language. Well, you just got to overinvest on that side of it.
Yeah, that's a Saban thing, right? He always talked about how when guys came in, they're going to use Alabama's language because it was easier for one guy to learn their language than it was for him to reteach his language to, 60, 70 kids. So that was always something that I remember him saying, is like, look, if you've established your program to what it is, like, build your language, and it is what it is. You got to fit your stuff into our language. And that didn't mean that they didn't adopt some new language, but for the most part, their core language was their core language. So that was a good
Ironically,
point.
This spring, we went through a renaming process for everything to try to just get it on the same page. And so that was kind of fun to like dump everything back out on the table, see what we could do. But yeah, the first spring, they're like, oh, we called that Cougar. I was like, what is Cougar?
Why?
Did we install that? What am I seeing? Or we called this one Squirrel. Okay, what does that mean? And these are both animals. Are they related? Nope, totally different. Okay, got it. Just try to like memorize
Cougar
it
and squirrel.
Yeah, memorize it as much as you can on that side. So.
Coach, I kind of like that, real quick, to back up, that you use the term "be curious" there. Because it's very reminiscent of my favorite show, which is Ted Lasso. Which, right, that's a big scene, the dart scene that everyone's seen, is the "be curious" scene. So I always say, as we progress on and we have newer athletes, right, Gen Z, We need to be a little more Ted Lasso and a little less Nick Saban. Not that there's any knock on Saban, but right. I'm saying it, right. I'm the one saying it.
It's not against your religion.
It is against my religion, right? But I always say if I go back that I want to try to be more Ted Lasso and less Nick Saban. And for the record, I was not as good as either one of them. So not even in the same breath as is even the fictional guy of Ted Lasso. But I do like that, the be curious. I think that we need to do a much better job, everybody, of asking questions and figuring out why before we jump to any kind of conclusions with our staff, our players, our kids, everything. And I'm speaking to myself before I'm speaking to anybody else with that comment. So I love that, Coach. I really do.
It's just like everybody wants to win, right? They're not trying to lose. So like, let's figure out what they're doing and why they think it's going to be good and see how we can help. One of the other things that I think really helped me in the jump was in that meeting I mentioned where they're like, no, football's football. We get it. This is good stuff. It's just, we talk about it a lot at work, but having what we call confident humility, I think there's a lot of times where people can kind of blur the lines and just to brash and, not humble. But confident humility, it's something I've done some reading on, but it's basically being secure enough in your expertise and your strengths that you can admit your ignorances or areas of weakness. And I think having that approach allows you to also be like, okay, here's where I can contribute. Here's where I'm going to be rough, going to need your help on. Here's where, we should just try to figure out some things together. And so if you have a staff who's all confident but humble, I think that's like the magic sauce to being able to create something great and be able to kind of put all the pieces together in the right way.
Yeah, and part of what you're saying where football is football, I think a lot of college and even pro guys that kind of changed their mind on these chats with high school guys after COVID, right? COVID, everyone got on so many Zooms together. Matt, you remember we were on Zooms every day and we got college coaches on Zooms. There were NFL coaches on Zooms and they started really having a lot more dialogue as opposed to like clinic stuff. And I think that's when they learned like, oh, these high school guys can coach too. And oh, this, vice versa. And it went all the way around. But I think since that moment, people are a lot more open to, reading stuff from high school guys and doing this stuff. And you learn all about it, right? We have the Cody Alexanders out there and the Dan Caseys and everything. And there was a big story the other day that I read on The Athletic about Dan Casey and about how, who is the OC for the Cowboys that was with the Chargers? He was the old quarterback. I forget what his name is now.
He's with the Eagles now.
Yeah. I forget his name, but he talked about how much he liked to read Dan Casey and invited him out to camp. And I think it's been such a swing in the last 5 years of coaches being more open to that, Greg. And I think that's a huge piece. And I'm not saying that's why you are where you are, but I think that because of certain things that happened in COVID, they were more likely to listen to you and have open conversations and things like that. And correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm just kind of going out and having a little hypothesis here, but I think that was a big piece of communication that's really bridged the gap between a lot of coaches nationwide.
I agree with that. Kellen Moore was his name.
That's it.
Kellen Moore.
But some of it too, I think, is personality driven. Like I just think there are some people who are not going to be interested in the conversation or aren't going to be open to changing. And so I think some of it's personality based too, where I agree the times and just the availability of content has helped everybody understand there's pros and cons to everything. Like,
yeah,
I think the other thing we learned during COVID was you can't install everything. Like, I can write down a million different things on every clinic I've been to, and then you're like, oh, actually I have to pick 3 to go install. But just like having that menu of options at your fingertips is pretty wild. And I think that's something that you're right. It's helped people at least like riff back and forth on ideas a little bit more. I like to refer to some of our game planning meetings as just jazz. We're just making smooth jazz here.
Well, yeah, and like you said, like, you may be a team that runs counter a lot, and then all of a sudden on Twitter, you see this like really cool variation of counter, and you're like, oh, that fits into what we do, right? Like we can just make a tag and run that tomorrow, So it's been such a cool thing. I think Twitter has turned into such a football coach's place that I love it because I don't follow anything else on Twitter. So God knows if there's politics or anything else on there, I don't pay attention to any of it. I just keep scrolling until I hit the next coach. So it's been great. So, Coach, now you were there, you became an assistant coach. Now you're calling the plays, right? The heavy load is on your shoulders. How did that come about? And then B, how has that been when you're not full time, right? You don't get to show up at, on campus at 7 a.m. and work on calling plays and game plans all day long. How in the world do you balance that at the college level? Because that's got to be incredibly hard.
I will say it just like when it happened, when we made the transition, it just felt like such a natural transition because of how we'd all been working together on that front. And so myself, Coach Cook, and Coach Dabrico, we started spring, and like I said, it was just me, my head spinning, trying to learn things and just trying to figure out where I could provide value. Maybe it was tweaking a practice script here or there. Hey, just making sure we have this period scripted in a different way. Hey, let's add, some hash change ups to this. During fall camp, it was, let's take an inventory of how many times we're running all these plays. And then in our scrimmage, what is, are we actually using the plays that we're practicing, and how do we do that? If you've been a head coach, you know that your list is 200 things long. Like, they're just never going to get to that. And so Coach Dabrico, who's the head coach, also was the OC before this. And it was like, if I can take items 31 off your plate, like, you're going to be more impactful. We're going to be more successful as an offense. And everybody's going to, I think, be a little bit happier too. And so I just think there's so many possibilities where you can find ways to provide value. And that was a little bit of it. The other thing that we did is we want tempo to be a big part of our offense. And we'd done some tempo stuff at Lincoln Lutheran, and they had done it last year, the year before I got there. And so some of it was, how do teams do this that are really good at this? What does good look like? And so I kind of just spent a weekend reading every article I could find, watching every podcast I could find, video I could find, and just like, here were the 10 things I learned about tempo and what's really good and what's really bad. And we kind of sat down and just had a meeting on it for an hour. And it's like, no, this is the kind of team I want to be. Here's those 10 things. And okay, this is how we're changing practice to do this. And this is how we're going to change our play calls to do this. And so it was one of those things that if you don't have those reps of kind of like building trust and everybody being able to throw everything on the table and see what works, you're not going to ever, have the opportunity to do that stuff. But having enough of those meetings where it's kind of like every Friday afternoon, instead of going and grabbing a beer at the bar, is like we were on the whiteboard talking. I was in Seward, Friday at 4:00 instead of going home. We were on the whiteboard in Seward talking and scheming and planning for what the year had looked like. And so we built a great relationship over the summer. And then as we got into the fall, like I said, a lot of the value that I felt like I could provide was just ordering things and providing kind of a method to the madness. I'm not necessarily the most creative guy, and Coach Dabrico and Coach Dabrico is definitely the most creative guy. Coach Cook is one of the best O-line coaches I've ever worked with, and I'm the kind of guy who can like put all of those things in the right order. And so it was as simple as saying, okay, if this is what we want to be as an offense, and here's how we want to play, here's what a play call sheet needs to look like, and here's kind of like menu and inventory of stuff that we want to be bringing into a specific game or an install period. And so it helped, like I said, just put a little bit of order to everything. And then it became when you're having your conversations between drives and your scrimmages, and we were like, here's the next 3 plays we want to run and why. Then it was like, we're kind of calling plays as a group anyways. And so it actually allowed Coach Dabrico to kind of take a step back and think about the whole team, the situation a little bit more. And instead of having to just worry about what's the very next play call, how do I get it right? How do I make sure the strength's in the right spot? We want to just do a little bit more planning ahead of time. And so that was where I think eventually it was just like, hey, this week you're going to play. It's like, I'm in. So, and so it was a natural transition. We didn't even really announce it to the kids, but it just kind of started happening. And then we made some moves. I went up in the booth later, in the last 2/3 of the season, and Coach Cook came down the sideline, and then he was able to spend more time with the O-line. And so just trying to blend where our strengths and where our weaknesses are to build the best offense we can. And we had a lot of success. So we had the most yards per game in school history. We scored 30 points per game for the first time since 1970 or something like that. So we had a lot of success, but we still don't have the like team level outcomes that we wanted. We finished 5-5. We had 2 games that were, one was a double overtime game where we lost by missing the 2-point conversion, and one we lost because we got stuffed on a 4th and 1 on the 1-yard line. And it's just like, so we still know we can improve so much, but it was kind of magical how everything kind of came together on that front. So I'm hoping we can keep building off for this year.
Yeah, and that's such a cool story. Just listening to the collaboration, how open everyone was, and all of that. That it's a really cool thing. So now just kind of talk about that work-life balance now that you're the OC, right? It's on you, and how are you balancing that with working at Hudl and with the wife and kid and all those other things that are going on?
Yeah, so it's still a lot of work. I think I know that part. Because Seward's a little further of a drive too, we got to get creative. So we lean way hard into technology. Like almost all of our meetings as a staff happen on Zoom. Our game planning meetings we do on Monday and Tuesday morning from 6:15 to 7:30. And so like we don't meet at all on Sunday. Our games obviously on Saturday, so we spend some of the night breaking it down and hanging out. And then Sunday we kind of do our own game planning or family activities. It's nice because if I want to get up at 5 a.m. and watch a bunch of film from the opponent that we're going to be playing, I can do that, and then I can hang out with the family a little bit in the afternoon, and then kind of finish. And then by 6:15, we have a doc. By 6:15 on Monday morning, we have a doc that is kind of our template. That's just, here's what they do on defense. Here's some things we're going to need answers for. Here's some plays that we want to invest in more. Here's some feedback on how we thought the last game went. Either this guy needs more touches, this guy needs less touches. We need these different formations more. And so we have a doc that we just all plug stuff in, and everybody has their own, kind of font color. And it's just, I'm going to type stuff in as we go. And then when we get to the Monday morning meeting, we'll review stuff from the previous week. And then by the end of the Tuesday meeting, we want all of our install and kind of practice plans set. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are our big work days. Monday is more of a walk day, shakeout from the game. And then Friday is our walkthrough day too. So it's an investment getting in there early. I'm the first one. I do it from the Hudl office. Like, I get into the Hudl office at 6:15 and turn the lights on and hop on a game plan meeting. And then I'm off by, like I said, 7:30. And then I usually say, hey, I might have 15 minutes to call you over lunch, but I'm going to be working. I'll see you at 3:00. And so I head out about 3:00, and usually on the drive from work to practice, I'm on the phone with somebody, whether it's, Coach Deverka or Coach Cook, and just kind of riffing on things or tweaking practice stuff or getting, pieces ready for the meeting that we're about to have with the kids. And so it's a lot. You got to be really efficient with your time. I like multitasking, so I'm always trying to find ways to do stuff at the same time. So that's how.
Yeah. So how is communicate? What position group do you coach? Are you quarterback still?
Quarterbacks. Yep.
So how is that with communication with your quarterback? He can't just pop in your office at noon and watch some film with you. So how do you guys kind of handle that?
Yeah. So we do try to still spend a little bit of time doing that, whether it's Mondays after practice or Tuesdays after practice, something like that. But a lot of our communication is just done through Hudl and through notes. I think the team has a good culture of after practice, the coaches are going to put notes on it, and everybody's expected to review the notes. And then we'll pick maybe the top 5 or 10 to go over in the team meeting the next day. But, we're not going to get through all 40, so everybody's going to go on and watch those. A lot of times I will also enlist them to help with scouting, things of, hey, it's your responsibility to go through and chart number 21, their defensive back this week. Where's the alignment? You're going to chart all that stuff, and then you're going to come back and report to our quarterback group on what you learned and what you saw. And that's a good way to kind of involve them in it too. It also helps. Coach Daverco meets with kind of our starting quarterback and a couple other ones pretty frequently, and so they'll pop on some film. And it's not uncommon for me to have a text waiting for me. Like I said, when I get off work, that's I met with DJ. Here's the 3 things that we talked about that you should provide answers on. And so that is a huge difference, I would say, in the college game and the high school game. Not that we didn't have incredibly smart players in high school, but the amount of questions that I get asked is just astronomical compared to high school kids. Obviously, I feel like the college players take it a lot more seriously, and they're really bought in and invested. Obviously, they have money invested, they got time invested. But I wasn't ready for the amount of push and kind of questions I got. Why do we do this? What do we do? Can we do this thing instead? Is it okay if I use this footwork instead of that footwork? And you're like, as long as we have a reason for what we're doing, we can figure it out. Like, I'm not going to be maniacal on, we got to use this thing. Here's why I think we should do it. Plan A. If you think Plan B can work, okay, but then here's the risks that are coming with Plan B that we got to be aware of from a technique or forward perspective. And so it's been fun to have players who really push you like an assistant coach. And that, they spend just as much time on it. They want to be just as successful. They're not getting paid other than their scholarship anyways. And so they'd rather be watching film than in class, I think, sometimes anyway. So they have a lot of ideas.
No, that's great. There's probably a lot of high school guys listening. They're like, man, I wish my kids came in with 100 questions. Like, I would kill to have that, right? Because that's all we want to do too is talk football, right? Like, unfortunately, in between, Matt's teaching math class right now. I used to teach history class and all, and it's like, would I rather talk about the offense we're going to see this week, or talk about the Battle of the Bulge or whatever else is going on. So I'm with you. It's like, let's talk football. I have to do the same lesson plan 7 times in a row. Like, by the end of it, I'll be honest with you, it's a little lackluster for me as well. So
I wish those kids came in. Teacher. Yeah, that's why I could never be a teacher. Because I was like, I'll be the worst history teacher in the history of the world if I try to coach football and do this at the same time. So I get to invest fully on the Hudl side, and it's totally disconnected from football in a lot of ways. And then football it's a totally different changeup. Everybody's like, well, don't you get super burnt out? It's like actually a nice relief in both areas where I get to go to something that's totally different, whether
Yeah.
it's the day job or the side hustle. And it's a totally different challenge. It's a totally different world, different people, different experiences. But there's so much translation of, I learned this skill the other day in practice. I'm going to try to apply that at Hudl. Or here's some management techniques we use at Hudl. I wonder if those will work from an athlete management perspective. And so you still get to just kind of experiment and try things, but it's a totally breath of fresh air that kind of helps prevent some of the burnout.
Yeah, I never thought about it like that. I mean, I know in my case, taking the break that I've taken over the last couple of years, like I feel refreshed and now I'm ready to get back on the field. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but I feel like I've had enough time away that I have a new perspective. And now I'm like, all right, I'm ready to implement that. It's not time yet, but I'm ready. I'm slowly building that. So it makes sense that you can almost get that feeling on a daily basis when you're just not always on campus. Just like we said, Mrs. So-and-so, who's an English teacher, is not bothering you every morning about Johnny because you're not there to bother, right? So some of that is probably nice too.
Yeah. I told Coach Debrico, I was like, you kind of gave me the best job in the world. I get to come in, I get to help build practice plans, I get to call plays, I get to have relationships with kids, but I don't really have to care about grades. I don't really have to care about kids getting in trouble in class. In college, you don't really have to deal with parents as much either. Like it's just like you gave me all the easy stuff, man. Yeah, you gave me all the easy stuff. So he likes to remind me that when he's like, are you talking football? We need to be talking football. I need an excuse to get out of this meeting or to get out of this. So I was like, yep, we got it. We'll get you.
All ball all the time. Matt, looks like you wanted to ask him something.
Yeah, Coach, you kind of talked about how ball is ball, whether it's high school, college level. Is there anything from the play calling side that you've noticed that's a lot different once you get to the college level?
Yeah, so the two things that I think really surprised me. So my baptism by fire was our first game was the defending national champs, Northwestern College Red Raiders. And so I was just like, I don't know how this is going to go. I guess we'll find out. So we went into the half down 21-7, I think. And we kind of all got together as a staff and on the whiteboard, okay, what are we seeing? What do we like? Okay, they're playing their safeties really wide. I think we can hit something down the middle. First play of the second half, the defense got a turnover, so we took over the ball at the plus 35, and we took the shot that we were going to take because they'd been playing cover two the whole first half, and so kind of variations on it. So we're like, let's take the shot. Middle field's going to be open. Scored a touchdown very first play. Did not see one snap of cover two the rest of the game. It's just like, well, that's cool. I got one. So then it was just like, you got to have the amount of changes and answers you need is so much more in high school because I always felt like in high school, they're going to come back to it. Even if you beat them on it at one point, they're going to come back to it because it's their base. They don't, this high school team might not have 5, 6, 7 answers. They're going to have to come back to stuff. And it was kind of wild to see a team just like, yep, we're good on that. We're not going to try that anymore. We're going to be in this version of cover three and then a different version of cover three after you beat that. And so you just got to have more answers teed up. As we started going throughout the year, we put more pressure on ourselves to kind of define those answers ahead of time. So we weren't just trying to like pull them out of a hat. I think the best coaches can do that. They can just say, need to go here. And if you know the system really well, you're going to be better at that. And so in a new system, we spend a lot of more time trying to like, if we get this coverage, this is an answer we need to have. If we get this front, this is an answer we need to have. If they beat us in this splits, this is an answer we need to have. So that we could kind of just go down that list and everybody could kind of remind each other, hey, this happened. Do we have the answer? And so Coach Debrico and I was going to use that as a reminder for us. The other thing, like on the flip side though, because you have so much more time and there's so much more multiplicity from a defensive perspective, you also get that from an offensive perspective. So like, I had 40 kids in high school, only 20 of which you'd ever want on the field usually. And so then it's like, my options are pretty limited. We had 9 guys play both ways, but in college you got 50 guys who play offense. Like you can find 3 tight ends. We had a package with 9 O linemen on the field last year at one point. We had
you
3
just
backs.
made Matt the happiest guy on earth right there.
It was wild. It was our head coach was the one who kind of was like, we need to try something different, and our O line coach was like, what about this? And so then we leaned into 9 O linemen and running back and a quarterback, and then we actually throughout the rest of the year just kept introducing packages with 1 less O lineman on the field and see if teams would notice. And so
he'd get to 11.
Put him at, and so we had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, O lineman packages, and that just gets so much more buy-in from the kids. I think I've heard you talk about it, Kyle, on some of the, like the sub packages that you have on third down. It's just like the buy-in the kids have when we call Rhino, like those 4 O linemen are sprinting out there faster than you've ever seen them run, and they are freaking firing off the ball like more aggressive than you've ever seen. And so that was kind of fun to just always have a few of those things in your back pocket that you can lean on, and the kids would be fired up about it, but also like it's going to be really hard to prepare for because we might run this 2 plays in this game and then not for another 2 weeks
Yeah.
because we're not in that situation. And so it puts a lot more pressure on you from a scouting perspective. You got to know some of the deeper answers that team might have, but you also get the same options. You get more kids, you get more options, you get more packages. That it goes both ways.
Yeah, I think that's just a really good point there. And, creating sub packages and all that, I think, just like you said, it creates buy-in for kids that don't play all the time. So have something for them, especially when you have teams that have a lot more kids on one side of the football. But I also like the point that you brought up just about, the whole aspect of teaching that and having more time in this, that. But the other thing that you communicated was you got to have more. And I get in this argument all the time. People are like, well, we're keep it simple, stupid, and all this other stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's real great. But what happens, just like you said, what happens when they've busted your cover 2 and you have nothing left? So go ahead and install all the stuff that you want to install. It doesn't mean you have to run it every Friday or every Saturday, but go ahead and install it. And look, Greg, I'm with you on it. You have to have answers. And at least if your kid went through it once or twice in camp, you can pull it back out. I'm not saying you pull it back out for the first time on a Friday night 3 months later, but you can pull it back out on a Monday or Tuesday install, and at least they have some familiarity with it if they've heard about it and seen it and run it, all that stuff. So I'm with you. More is, I think you got to have those answers, because if you don't, then you're sitting in a game being like, all right, there's nothing we can do. And that's the worst feeling in the world. And I've been there as a DC. I've been like, hey, we only have one empty check. So when this team goes empty 30 times a night, like, we have one check. And so if they figure out how to exploit it, we're in trouble. And you just kind of like, oh crap, this is not a fun moment.
The beauty of coaching is like if you can get your kids to understand that empty checks 2, 3, and 4 are actually just empty check 1 with this tweak or that tweak, or the third tweak. It's like that's where the magic happens. So that's really what we invested a lot of time in this off season. Was, like I said, we kind of had a mismatch offense where we did a lot of stuff, but we maybe only used this play like 3 times in the season.
Yeah.
So then I was like, do we really need that, or would we rather invest that time on a tag off of the pass play that we ran 35 times? And so now we have a tag that, this is the most common coverage we saw that beat this play. Okay, now we have a tag off of it that's going to change a route or change 2 routes. And like, I would rather invest the time installing that. And it's all the same terminology, but that's kind of why we had to go through and rename things, was just so we could have a base level of terminology, then build off of it from there. And that, I think that's the magic of coaching, is like, it's actually not that much more complex to the kids. It's going to look more complex to the defense or to the offense or whoever you're facing, but your kids can learn it so much easier.
That's the I don't know if you ever saw the clinic on YouTube, and this defensive guy, so maybe you don't watch that stuff, but McDonald, the new head coach for the Seahawks, talked about that when he was with the Ravens, how they basically had this blitz, and it was, one name, but they just, each week they create a new path for that. So it was always like trap cover 2 behind it. Like, all right, this week, like for this name, like you 4 are going, and this week you 4 are going. And it was always different people. So they were like, see, this week we dropped both of our D tackles into the hook. And I know at most levels you can't do that, but it was really cool to listen to how he simplified it with his players so they could play super fast. So it was a really cool teaching point, but it's exactly like what you're saying, Greg. It was just like, hey, we call it this, and it's basically a different tag every week, right? Like, hey, this week you guys are going and you guys are dropping. And it was basically a simulated pressure with just trap 2 behind it is all it was. But it was kind of a cool thing. And cool to listen to an NFL guy talked about keeping it simple in between the weeks. You're like, you're in the NFL. Like, do you have to keep it simple? And the answer is yeah.
That's. I mean, that was the method we took with the O-line packages. Like I said, we started with 9, and then every week is like, okay, what if we're in a different formation? What if we're with one less O-lineman? The fight for the 8th O-lineman spot or the 9th O-lineman spot was pretty fun to watch.
Brutal.
As a coach, but they would get offended if, we only got 8 O-linemen this week.
Oh yeah, that probably hurt some feelings, Matt. What do you think?
Absolutely. I know it was with my kids. We used to call it the Winn-Dixie package because they're the beef people. So, give them a fun name for it. Coach, you talked earlier about tempo and adding tempo into the offense. And I know that can give a bunch of issues if your terminology doesn't match that, and coming in changing the terminology and then adjusting the tempo. Anything you can give coaches off making those changes in your program?
Yeah, that was one of the things, honestly, that we had the first big discussion on. Was we say we want to be tempo, but our play calls are 7 words long. Like, how do we bridge that? It's just like, it's going to take too long to get in there from a signal perspective. And so how do we do that faster? And so some of it was, okay, let's find ways to combine this formation name, or let's find ways that this word means this combo formation name and play name. And so we kind of ended up having to create a second language for some of the plays and some of the concepts that we ran. And that was actually helpful in terms of speeding us up. It also, it's just easier to call because one of the most common formations we're in was kind of a 3-by-1 nub tight end set. And so we had to just make a rule that said, hey, in this set, it's always going to be to the field. The three right receivers are always going to be to the field. Am I giving something up by not having that into the boundary? Yeah, if I want that into the boundary, I can use the full play call, the full formation name. But when we call, this one word or two word, it means these three are to the field, and then everything kind of builds off of that. We have plays to the three receiver side, plays to the tight end side, and everybody kind of understands where that went. And so that was helpful. I think the other thing that we needed to do a better job of was just, are we practicing in a way that's going to replicate the tempo that we want? And so, if we're trying to rotate every 3 plays, like, you're not going to get any practice at a 5-6 play drive. And so we put, on a GA and a umpire shirt, we did 6-play series where we were moving the ball 5 yards every time. And it was just like to get what that feel looks like and understand that, yeah, by the 6th play, you're going to be tired. That's okay. They're also going to be tired. And as long as you know what you're doing, you're going to be more successful in this. And so we kind of had to change how we practice to really show that, no, this is something that we believe in and we're bought in on. I don't think those things are revolutionary, but we've also tried to find ways to do that in our drill work. So we might work a running back, quarterback mesh drill, and it's the same thing. So we're trying to run it every 5 yards, and we're trying to run it off fast. And so it's not just a team created thing. We're trying to do it individual drills and stuff like that too. But it forces creativity for you as a coach. If tempo is something that you think is important and you want to do it, you got to figure out ways to just make it simple for the kids.
Yeah, and they got to work on it every single day. You got to practice getting the ball back to the official, making sure that becomes second nature to them, and then getting lined up and looking for the next play. That was always our issue, was getting the kids' eyes back to the sideline once they got lined up, and let's get that play call in as quick as we can.
I've had to learn to, just as a play caller, there's things that I can do to help them, like not flipping a formation or not, using a motion to move a kid and not necessarily calling a different formation. It's so much, you don't realize how much time that takes. But if I move from a 2-by-2 set to just a 3-by-1 set, it's actually better for me to just line up in the 2-by-2 set and call a motion with that play instead of calling it into the 3-by-1. It's like you get up to the line so much faster and you're changing the picture right before they snap it. Like, I wanted to be in trips for this. Well, I'll just line up in doubles and motion them over. And that's not something that I was used to as a play caller going super fast, but it's something that you kind of had to learn. And then you learn to tell the kids, like, just line up where you were. I will then move you probably where we need you to. And so don't come back to the middle of the field every time and then look, because you're probably going to just have to run back to where you were. So like, go to where you were, and we'll try to minimize how much you're running one way or the other.
Yeah, and I know that's a big piece for Matt. Obviously, you know this better than me, but that's kind of a hypo thing too, right? Where you just tell them, just line up where you're at and we'll move you if we need to.
They had a different philosophy on that. But
I know it's slightly different, right? But it's similar, right? Like, just get them lined up and we'll worry about it after they're lined up. Yeah.
Once you're lined up, we'll make the play call and go. Yeah.
One of the biggest, in one of the articles, I think it was Tennessee versus Missouri in maybe 2021. The very first drive that they did is all over YouTube, and it is like a tempo masterclass. There's a different formation every play, doing all that stuff, and you're just like, that's what good looks like. Holy cow, that's what good looks like. Okay, how do we build our system to do that? If you know anybody at Tennessee, man, you have that. Joey Halsey won't respond to my emails, but I'm trying to get some in there on that to just understand, again, the mechanics. I think we can always learn how to do that stuff better.
I'll give you a tip. Call USF instead. We'll talk about that off air. Kind of same people, but no, it's such a good point. You guys are talking about tempo, and as a defense, I was a defensive coordinator with a super high tempo offense. We kind of ran that vertical choice, super fast offense at Oakleaf, and so like it makes us practice different too. And it's a different world for us, and we have to get with it. But to be honest with you, it makes the defense better for when you see tempo teams, because now tempo teams no longer bothered us because we practice against a blur tempo team every day. So when people were like, "Oh, we're hurry up," I was like, "You guys are slow as hell. Like, this doesn't bother us one bit. We have the play and we're lined up, we're ready to go. You guys are still looking on the sideline." So we used to enjoy that. So I actually I hated working with tempo offenses early, especially in pass skill. It's like the worst drill against tempo offenses because you'll let a post go and you guys will be lined up with a new ball. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? But it is what it is. I do think it makes defenses better if you practice correctly with tempo offenses. So I did enjoy that quite a bit. But I digress. Matt, any other questions for Greg until we get into our final question?
No, I think it's really respectable the way he's
It's awesome.
Been able to be outside of teaching and come in, and I mean, something that I always wish I could have done.
Yeah.
I'm kind of jealous of that you're able to separate the football from your normal job. I think that's really respectable to follow that path, being able to be a head coach for 9 years, transition it to the college level, and to keep your normal job normal. And I mean, to me, that would be a dream come true to actually be able to do that, and at the level you're doing it with both your job and at the college level, being an offensive coordinator. Hats off to you, Coach. That's awesome.
Yeah, Greg, I'm completely jealous. Like I am. Like I love you, and it's awesome that's happening to you, but I'm also so jealous that you're able to pull all that off, man. I'm just gonna be honest. You need to hear it. Like there's probably a lot of people listening that are jealous too, and you need to hear that because I think it's a huge accomplishment. So good for you, man. That's just awesome.
I'm definitely lucky. And like I said, it doesn't work unless you got supportive family, you got supportive kind of coworkers and people who understand that it's a sacrifice too. But yeah, as long as you got your priorities straight, I think you can make it work.
And I'll brag a little more on you. I've worked with Greg. He worked with me at Hudl. I've been around, talked with him for years. I mean, couldn't be a better dude that gets all this too. So it's definitely well deserved. Greg, I'm done bragging on you because I know you don't like it because you are one of those humble people. So let's go ahead and get to our last question. What is the most unique thing or interesting thing that your program does that no one else does?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of brag on Coach Daberco a little bit. I think I hear that family is a priority so much from like every football coach ever. Our 6:30 meetings, our 6:15 meetings when we start those, they are done at 7:30 every single day because he's going to take his kids to school. Like we don't go till 7:35 or 7:40. Like he's out. If we want to keep meeting, cool, but he's gonna go. Like he's always gonna go, and he's always gonna take the kids to school. Same thing for before meetings. It's like if you want to talk to him before meetings, you got to do it before 3 because he's going to pick up from school at 3, and then he'll be back at 3:30 for when our meetings start. And like I've never seen somebody prioritize and again show you what good looks like for like, okay, this is what prioritizing a family looks like. I understand that now. You carve out, you make time, things have to start on time, end on time. You have to also create an atmosphere that you want to kind of bring your kids around. And so
yeah,
it's not uncommon to see kids running around at practice or post practice. I know that's normal from other places too, but I've seen so many staffs and so many, even myself as a coach, where it's just like, yeah, we're going to hang around after practice and talk and just tell stories. And then all of a sudden an hour's gone and you're like, oh, my kids are totally with time. It's like, he doesn't hang around afterwards because he knows that that's family time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean he doesn't want to build a relationship, but like I've never seen somebody kind of prioritize it at that level. And it's something that I'll carry with me kind of wherever I go in the future too, is like, oh, you can do both. You got to not live 45 minutes away from where you coach, but like you can do both if you do it that way, the right way. Otherwise, I'm a FaceTime guy now.
No, I love it. I agree. I mean, it's like coaches, if you take anything out of this, if you're a head coach, do the Bruce Arians thing, fire people if they don't go to family events. You should threaten them like that because it's more important. I love football as much as any other coach, but I'll tell you what, my little baby girl that's sleeping in the other room right now is the most important thing. I quit football for her any day of the week and twice on Sunday. And I know, Greg, you feel the same way about your kid and all the coaches nationwide. Make sure that's the number one thing, because I think, just like you're saying, when you're more fulfilled with all that other stuff, you're probably a better football coach too. When you're happy at home, you probably coach a little better. And that's just everything in life. You're probably better at Hudl when you're happy at home, right? Yeah. And Matt, you're probably a better teacher when you're happy at home. So all these things do happen.
I think you can get creative with it too. Every Tuesday night during the fall, Coach Deberco's son played flag football at a place that's halfway between our school and my house. He literally just hop in with me and say, drive home. And so I would drive home. I pull off to the side of the road. He'd get out and run to the field that his kids were at.
That's awesome.
So it was just like, it was a good chance for us to catch up during that time, but also just like really cool example of he's going to prioritize his family and he's not making sacrifices on that front.
That sounds like such an awesome setup, Coach. I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited to follow you guys, and me and Matt are probably going to ask you off air if we can get some all 22 of that 9-0 line set. We kind of want to watch that, so we'll have to ask for that. If you're out there and you want to interact with Coach on Twitter, obviously we just talked about how busy of a guy he is, but we will hand out his Twitter handle like we do everyone else. It's Greg J. Nelson. I did. I followed you for so long, but I went on our board drill one. There's a lot of Greg Nelsons out there, so it's Greg J. Nelson. make sure you get that right. Again, that's Coach. If you want to get any kind of messaging to him and you feel like you don't want to bother him too much, you can always reach out to us at the Board Drill Podcast at gmail.com or on Twitter at Board Drill Pod, TikTok, all that stuff that we do. And again, I, of course, forgot to open up with it, but if you're still listening at this point, could you please like and subscribe to this video and everything else we do? Again, the more likes and subscribes we do, the more we can continue to do what we're doing, hopefully help pay for some of these services that we use, like Riverside here on the podcast and everything else, and grow our following. And I think that's the most important part. We're here to help coaches and here to educate coaches nationwide. And Coach Nelson, thank you so much for helping us do that tonight. I think that coaches are really going to love hearing about your journey.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, have a great night.
Thank you, Coach.
Thanks, guys.